If you've been lucky enough to have a mentor in your life, you know the value of the guidance they can provide you. But what about a femtor? I'm Steph from Heinemann, and today on the podcast, we are hearing from Irene Castillón, a Heinemann Fellowship alum who currently serves as an assistant principal in San Jose, California. During her time as a Heinemann Fellow, Irene explored topics of guiding professional relationships, alumni peer groups, and how to best support first-generation college students. Since then, Irene's scope of focus has expanded to zoom in on the deep value of mentorship between women, what she calls femtorship. Today, she is joined by Dr. Patricia López of Fresno State University and Angela Rascon, a current student at St. Mary's College of California.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. So first, I've been looking forward to this for a long time because I get to share space with two powerful mujeres, and it's kind of, to me, a connect the dot moment, right? So Dr. López is one of my femtors. I had her as a professor at San Jose State University, and she really has helped me not only get through, she helped me not only get through grad school, but continues to help me navigate different situations. And she's actually the one who told me about the Heinemann Fellowship that I ended up applying to and getting selected to, that led me to do action research project, that led me to work with Angela in my project for Heinemann. So it's really great to be able to connect the dots in this space and think about really what femtorship looks like as we think about our own connected relationships, right? And how we reflect and share that really with the world. So excited to have you both here, and thank you so much for your time, which I know is so limited, right? So thank you for taking the time to be here. So Dr. López, my first question, so you have organized events and webinars through your work with Enseñamos en el Valle Central. And even though I'm not in the Central Valley, I've really had a chance to attend webinars. Yay, thank you, Zoom. And in them, you've mentioned the word femtorship and not mentorship. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little to why femtorship, why use that word when thinking about relationships in like advising and guiding.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Irene. You actually made me go back and really think about, sometimes there are things that just feel so instinctual in the work that we do. And when we get asked those questions, it's an opportunity to just kind of explain. And, so just really quick, the Enseñamos en el Valle Central, it's a university initiative. It's a Hispanic Serving Institution grant, HSI grant, initiative to cultivate future educators, future Latinx educators, future bilingual educators. And, we know that of that community, a lot of them are more likely to identify as female. And so in doing our work and creating just opportunity structures, right? Mentoring is a really important opportunity structure that is, it's across. I mean, even when you become a professional. And so I think that issue of continuing to say mentorship in a space that is not only just comprised overwhelmingly of females, but also involves, men, right? Males, queer males, but also feminist and feminist aspiring kind of epistemologies. And so a lot that we do is really grounded in Chicana feminists, like, Black feminist kinds of ways of thinking and knowing and navigating these systems. So it was just one of my team members was like, we really should think about using the concept of femtor. And I just think that it really encapsulates, what's really happening and the fact that we are highly, in these professions, we are also highly gendered. We're racialized, and we're definitely very gendered individuals. And so we have to acknowledge that. So long-winded, Irene, but that's really, a little bit of what brings that term. And I'm glad that it was something that resonated for you.
Yeah, and thank you for really bringing us back, right, to the importance of our context and the importance and the power of words in disrupting, and creating change. So thank you for that. So my other question is for both you, Dr. Lopez, and Angela. Thinking about femtorship in your life, right? What does femtorship mean to you? And then what experiences did you have with femtorship growing up / in schooling?
So thank you, Dr. Lopez, for providing us with that context of what femtorship means, because truthfully, I didn't really hear about this concept until earlier today. So now having it in, context, I'm like, oh, okay, I was right on it with what I was thinking. So I was thinking more of inspiration, right? And so that's what femtorship means to me. That's inspiration. And my experience with mentorship growing up and in schooling was, I don't really think I ever had a mentor or someone who I thought of as a mentor, or even in education, I never really saw a teacher like me. So I grew up in Eastside San Jose. I went to school in Eastside San Jose, yet the demographic was very much Latino, Vietnamese, but the teachers who were serving us did not identify with either or. It wasn't until I was 14 and a Mexican-American history class being taught by a Mexican-American teacher, Ms. Castillón, it wasn't until then where I saw myself reflected and those experiences being embodied by someone. She came from a similar socioeconomic background, similar household languages. We shared languages and culture in common. And so it didn't really appear in schooling until I was in high school.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that, Angela. I grew up in the Central Valley. Sometimes it's a little bit just wild to think that I'm back here doing this work, essentially where I grew up. And I also didn't. I grew up in a predominantly, Latino neighborhood and community, went to school overwhelmingly, of people from, mainly Mexican communities, right? We say Latino, but it was very much and continues to very much be an overwhelming Mexican community. And so, I think back and later in graduate school, really having an analysis and tools to think about that. And you're probably spending just as much, if not more, of your time in that schooling context than you are, even sometimes with your parents if they work. And so not having that connection, not having those individuals. So I definitely did not have mentors within the schooling context. I was very involved with the local community center. And, there I did find mentors. There were, it was overwhelmingly young people who were from the community. And so I don't know that I knew that they were mentoring me, but they were surely, calling my parents if I popped off, so there were some parenting, right? This concept of the village was very much alive in my growing up years. And so definitely not in the schooling context, but within other, and I deem those spaces as those are learning spaces. Those are places where we are being, educated, right? Where we are learning. And fundamental, for me, that was a major space where I learned and became who I am. So yeah, so I would say more community-based mentorship, Irene, more, yeah, just growing up and seeing that and feeling that, and somehow that just kind of became natural for me too, to be that person with other people, my family, community.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing and, thinking about learning spaces in general, right? Whether that's in a school building, whether that is at a community center, right? And really also highlighting the importance of seeing ourselves reflected in others, right? One time I texted Angela about something Dr. Lopez did for me, actually. And then, Angela, you want to share what you said in my text?
Yes. So I said, it seems like Dr. Lopez is who you are to me. So I don't know if that makes sense, but the relationship that me and Ms. Castillón have is the relationship that I see Ms. Castillón and Dr. Lopez having.
Yeah, really. And that, representation, right? And for me, it was my second year, right, of grad school at San Jose State where I really felt that. And I went, I grew up in schools where it was probably predominantly, Black and brown students, but didn't see that in the educators, right? Or in the different learning spaces that I was a part of. So thank you for that. So yes. Dr. Lopez is my Miss Castillón. So thank you for that. All right, Dr. Lopez, I have a question, and you kind of touched about this in the last question, but I know that you mentioned thinking about being that person for others, and I know that you're extremely busy, but yet you take the time to advise and guide students. So wondering, why make that time, right? And what impact do you hope to have in that role?
Man, to me, I feel a sense of obligation. I'll just be honest. I really do feel this, whether it was directly or indirectly. I know that things that, people before me really created the opportunity for me. I mean, think about it. I'm, this kid who grew up on the north side, in the barrio of my small hometown. I graduated continuation high school. It wasn't like I was this cream of the crop, kind of student. But I think that there were a lot of people who, regardless of those structural barriers before me, like they just kept pulling me and pulling me. And, I feel like it's an honoring of those, that what has been done for me. And, and I'm sure that they didn't have time either. So I always feel like, and I'm always very open with individuals who come into my journey who share, because there are things that I'm also not a good mentor at certain things, right? So I'm also very forthcoming about that. Like, if like I'm your go-to person for these things, right? And, and there are things that I'm just not like, and I'm okay with that, right? Like, I'm also very open to who I am. And that's why I'm a firm believer on people also telling individuals who I have an opportunity to mentor, to have multiple mentors, right? And so I feel like in being open with, who I am, things that I'm just not strong in, right? So I'm always big on saying, like, man, this is not my strength. That also gives mentees, colleagues, the opportunity to know, like, I'm probably not the go-to person on that. So then when I'm in these relationships, and I see them as relationships, individuals like Irene is like, you're literally calling me because you're like, this is my go-to. Like, this person, I know that in this situation, this person will really guide me in this, right? I will never mislead someone. Like, I care enough about people to say, like, man, don't let me mislead you, because I don't know that world or that situation, but I'm gonna find you someone, right? And so I think also, it's the time to also say, hey, let's put you with this individual, because this individual is going to get you where you need to go. And so I just feel like it's so collective. And in that manner and building that relationship, it doesn't feel like it takes up time. It doesn't. In fact, I wish I had more time. And I feel like it's the same. Like when your sibling or one of your primas calls you, you don't feel like, like, oh my God, I don't have time. It's just like, you just do it. It just feels that way. So that's kind of how I feel about that, Irene, in terms of, I just don't see it as having to make time or carving out time or like any of that. It's just, the relationship is there and the relationship is open. We know each other, like Irene is like, I'm not going to call at a certain time. Like, I know she's having an event. We're in each other's world enough to just kind of know that too. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing and really, hitting on this familia, right? That relational aspect of familia. And, you mentioned care and cariño and love, right? Which you definitely infuse, right? When we have conversations, and knowing that, like, what you say, right? And knowing that what I say to Angela really comes from like this deep place of heart, and soul and roots, if that makes sense, in terms of where we're going, right? Angela, what are your thoughts on that?
Full circle kind of thing. Like it's exactly what we're thinking. Even like even the primas part, like that, just literally same, because I'm the first in my family to be in higher education. That's not on just completely merit based. So I've had cousins who are like scouted through sports or like through other avenues where they have someone on campus who is advocating for them, who is like, I'm on your team, like here on campus. but I'm the first one to be on like merit-based scholarships. So for me, it's like navigating this space where I don't really have a coach advocating for me here, or I don't have like, I'm also first generation student. So I didn't, there's, only limited resources for first gen students. I didn't make the cut. And so it's like, I don't have anyone here on campus, but it's like, yeah, my primas will call and they'll be like, hey, I have an essay due at 11:59. I'm like, girl, it's 10. Like, why would you barely, like, it's 10. But, I'm like, just send it. And even if it's grammar check or like correcting MLA, or if it's APA, like, what does that mean? Like figuring it out with them. So I loved how you brought in, like, it doesn't feel like, oh, and we're the same age, like them and we're the same age. Only difference is like, I came to a 4-year and they're like, well, she went to a 4-year, so I'm going to reach out. And I'm like, okay, well, let's figure it out together. Like some of them have been older too. And I'm like, okay, well, this is a grammar thing, or this is a citation issue, like whatever it is, like, it's like that aspect of like figuring it out together. And I don't think I consider myself like a mentor, but it's like, we were talking about this earlier, but it's like a friend who knows, or like someone who's willing to put in that time. I think time is a very big thing.
Yes, and figuring it out together. I think before I had these relationships of community, right, specifically with other women of color, I felt like I was so alone and like it was very individual, right? And so being in this space just reminds me of the importance of the collective, right? And how that really has roots, right, in our indigenous roots, right? And our ancestors, and how really femtorship is also a way of bringing that back, right? And honoring that as really a sacred space. Angela, so you spoke a little bit about your primas, right? And how you kind of see yourself as a femtor to them. I'm wondering, as you think about femtorship, what is the most important characteristic of a femtor in your opinion?
Trust and continuity. So these two things it's not built over 1 or 2 days, it's years. So I think the most like trust, right? Like I think back to senior year of high school, like when our relationship started, I was, a freshman in high school, but then I think it was just like, hi, how are you? Good, how are you? But then senior year, you're like, okay, like college applications are starting. We're going to do this. It was like your dedication towards like our educational success. Like there were some days where we were on campus from like 4 p.m. to like 9 p.m. because this deadline was going to close and you wanted us to submit these applications. And we just found out about the scholarship this morning. And like, that was your time, right? And so it was like, we were building trust during those times. And then the clearest memory I have is when senior year, stressed because I imagined like tuition, like I'm like, oh, it's going to be X amount. But then seeing the bill like right in front of me, I was like, what is this? Like, this is thousands and thousands of dollars that I don't have. And so I would lose sleep. Like, I think my mom would hear me like moving around in bed, and I just like would lose my appetite, and I was losing hair because of how stressed I was. I was like, I worked so hard for 4 years, and like now this like college dream is not in my hands. Like, it's not attainable. And then I think my mom called you. I don't know how it worked out. She might have gone into the office, but you pulled me aside and you were like, trust me. And like, even now I can like literally, we were outside of one of the portables and you were like, you just have to trust me. It's going to be fine. Because I didn't know how like this institution worked, and you did. And just like, you literally just saying like, trust me. That's when we started building our, like, I was like, okay, like this is going to be my person. Like, and even to date, whether it's like good news or bad news, like, you're the second person I want to talk to. I'm like, just yesterday I sent you a text. I was like, I got the scholarship, So it was like that trust, but then it's like the continuity that keeps it going. So that didn't just end when I was a senior in high school. Now I'm a senior in college and we're doing grad school applications. So it's like, it's like a continuous relationship that we've been able to build.
Yes, grad school applications. We're going to handle that situation. Yes, no, and thank you for, again, trusting me, right? And really thinking about also the family part and your mom reaching out to me, right? And so I think it's also getting back to what Dr. López was saying, right? Of the familial relationship. And also, Dr. López, you said like, your mentors called your parents, right? And so having that almost a relationship beyond the student, right, beyond the individual, and with their community, right? Again, so that struggle is not just on one person, but really looking at it as like, all right, how could we, like, as a community, right, figure out the situation to get through what we got to get through. Super excited for you, Angela, and so proud of you. But Dr. Lopez, so you mentioned a little bit about your own identity and your own background. I'm wondering, how has your identity and positionality impacted your role as a femtor and the way that you advise and guide your students?
I think probably because I do feel like a lot of times we come into each other's journey in some of those situations, like what Angela just explained, right? Like, here you are feeling, overwhelmed, you're feeling vulnerable, you're juggling a lot. And so, I see that a lot in some of the people who I get to mentor. And so sometimes I'll use myself in a joking way and saying, I think I even alluded to it earlier, where I just say, look, if someone like me can get this far and you have like 10 times more talent and brilliance than I did at that stage, you got this, right? And sometimes it's humanizing yourself to someone who can easily be looking up to you, right? So I'm very conscious of that sometimes in my role and Irene, in your role, like, we can quickly like lose sight that other individuals are looking up to us, and we have to humanize ourselves, right? So I share my journey, I share the things that, and people who were really instrumental in helping me to get through, just like structural obstacles. And I do feel that that's also part of, who we are, as, you invoked, right? Just our indigenous, our ways of knowing and ways of being, and that humility. And so, I talk about, it's not just identity in the sense of like nationality or, like those aspects, but it's about what we're grounded in, right? And what is it that's at our core. And I can get feisty sometimes, but overwhelmingly when it comes to, like, I do put humility and, a little bit of humor in there too. And, just sharing my journey and sharing things that aren't always obvious, right? So a lot of times individuals who become mentees can really, again, lose sight and think that, like this, they're not going to get through it. And to share and be open in saying, like, I've been there, right? The same way, like, Angela, you explained, like, that's so important. And to let them know, remind them, right? Like, I grew up working class, right? Like, I had these similar things, and then I didn't have certain things, right? Like, I have a lot of a number, I should say, a number of undocumented students, and also saying, like, that is not my journey, right? That is not an obstacle, but we can work through that obstacle, right? Like, it is not the all encompassing, like, your whole future is because of that. So I think, just when I think about identity and positionality, I see it more or just as much about what grounds us, right? And all the things, Irene, that you've already been naming, right, and putting out there, I think are so much a part of that.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like that connects to, like, always grounding us in our why, right? Like, why we do what we do. What is it that, like, leads us, right? To take time, like you said, both of you said, right? And where that originates from. So that holding on to our why is really important. So thank you for sharing that. So, Angela, you're going to be an educator. So, everyone, Angela is applying to grad school programs in the in different schools of education to become a teacher, which is amazing. And I'm so excited for her. So, as you think about your students, right? What lessons do you hope that your students will learn from you?
So the most important one that I want them to learn is I want to teach ethnic studies, which I don't know if y'all know, good news, it's now going to be implemented in K through 12. So I'm like, woo, just in time. But that's where I want to be. I think history, I love history. It's really fun, especially when you're being taught your own history and you're seeing your stories reflected. It's her story. It's not just history. So I love that. I think it's great. I don't know. I like when students are able to connect, but with that, I want students to know themselves, right? To know their history, to be comfortable in their identity, whatever that may be, and, their backgrounds, and come into higher education with that knowledge of knowing themselves, like a secure identity, to be confident that some of these identities that they hold are not a deficit, but they're an asset to the communities that they're coming into. For me, I came in with a very strong identity of self and like nationality. And I already knew like race and ethnicity because those classes were available to me in high school. And I see like how hard it is for certain students to be in spaces where not everyone is necessarily rooting. I don't say rooting for you, but you're coming to higher education where people from all over the world are. We're not in our little bubble. For us, it was like Eastside San Jose, and like what that community looked like, to coming to a private, small Catholic school with people coming from all over the world. One of the strongest things that I came in with, I know I'm Mexican American, I know I'm first generation, I know I'm Latina, I know I'm a woman. And like, this is what I knew and I was confident in. And so when I was in these classes, I'm like, I'm in this ethnic studies class. And for the first time, the person next to me is learning the difference between race and ethnicity and nationality. But it's like, I already know this and I already know who I am. And so when you're reading a lot of these things that you're exposed to, you're like, I can look at this through a different lens. Like I can use like a feminist lens to view this, or I can look at this from a different angle, and it's not the ethnic studies classes necessarily that there's that identity and like that you need, but it's in other courses where you're discussing like Western literature. And it's like, okay, what does that mean to me as like in my identities? Like, how do I connect to this? Can I connect to this? And like, how do those people's opinions, how are they coming at me with my identity? Like, what does that mean? So just like being secure and confident in who they are and knowing their history. Ethnic studies is such a broad thing, and I want them to like, whatever their background is, like bring that culturally competent education into the classroom so that when they're leaving it, they're like, I know who I am, I know what these themes are, and I can be critical of what I'm reading and what is being fed to me.
Yes, and I'm so excited for your students to learn that, right? And I find myself in our conversations, Angela, as you're taking these ethnic studies courses, right? Like I've learned so many lessons from you in terms of what it means to be, more just, more inclusive, right? Being really mindful, right, of different aspects of my life, right? Where I need to really think critically about what it means to decolonize certain parts of my life, right? And you bring that to me. And so I'm so excited for your students to have that and for your knowledge to be shared with your classmates in your teacher ed program and of course your students. Dr. López, what about you? What lessons do you hope that your students learn from you?
Man, I think Angela really captured a lot of it. For me, there's definitely a difference, or also coming out of just those opportunities to know the self, right? Those were very important things that happened for me early on through community, right? Through being a part of a community center, and those things were happening outside of formal schooling context, and they were happening in our home, right? We also don't regard the pedagogies of the home as an education, right? And so for me, I'm really big on saying those things openly with folks that I get to mentor, because, or being a femtor to somebody, because it's just, that's important too, right? And those things are really important, and to like deconstruct those things as well, right? There are things that are happening in community and homes. I'm in teacher education, and so preparing future teachers to really think about that even before they hit the classroom, right? Like, what do you know about yourself? What do you know about others? What do you know about the young people you're going to, educate? What do you really know? And so you reference decolonial, like it's also decolonizing of the self. And I think that is big, supporting people to feel comfortable and not stigmatized by that practice, right? And, those are things that get reinforced. Like to Angela's point, those things should always simply be reinforced within the formal schooling context, within courses that hold the label, right? A label of ethnic studies, Latino studies, all of those, like, but within the whole climate and culture of schooling, because, for me, a lot of it is to hold those epistemologies, those ways of knowing. And so I think for me, that's a biggie is, for my femtees, overwhelmingly to just know that, like, the institution, going back into an institution that is probably already, kind of did a job on self-esteem, on their sense of self. So I want them to know that is just as important as knowing all the content, knowing all of the different facts and things like that those things are really important. And I think, how Angela articulated within how she envisions it, right? Like, because it's not, right, Angela, it's not just like, let's go learn all the timelines and all of the heroes and the figures and the people. It's about, like, who are you as well, right? It's just as much as about the self as it is about all of these other, just these other things that get covered and that we're kind of held to know or measured on how much we know and don't know. So, and the advice is to also carry that on, which I completely can see in your relationship. I see it. It's vibrant. It's so obvious. And it's just amazing to me how it is not something, it's still rare. It's still rare to be in community with people, let alone, right, for a femtor or femtee to really feel like you can be vulnerable and just be reminded that loving yourself is more important than any of these other endeavors. And those endeavors will only reflect, right, how you do and how you, like, navigate all these systems, it's going to come back to, that important thing. And so I want my femtees to do that with others, right? Like, remind them, like, man, love yourself, right? That is so important. I don't care. I will never care if Angela knows or doesn't know every, like, fact about, Mexican American history or herstory, right? If who she is and loving herself isn't there, like, that's what's going to be infectious to her students, right? That's what those young people are going to just latch on, because they're going to see you as someone who loves yourself and then is also exploring these really cool things, right? So yeah, I think the issue of cariño, of love, self-love, Irene, really resonates with me and how you've brought us through this conversation. And I think that's important to lift that up.
Yeah, and especially as we think about, the spaces, and sometimes, cariño and love aren't necessarily welcomed in those spaces, right? And I think that lifting that up here is so powerful. And so I just really want to thank you for helping me to love myself and share of myself with others through the femtorship that we have, and the multi-generational impact, right? That it won't stay here, that we're going to keep it going. And that to me gives me so much hope, because I know that is grounded in love, right? So thank you for sharing your thoughts. So appreciative of you too. And thank you. Las quiero.
Our thanks to Irene and her guests for their time today. You can learn more about Irene's work by following her on Twitter at MSBigCastle. Find a transcript of this episode at blog.heinemann.com.
The Heinemann Podcast is a production of Heinemann Publishing. It is produced and edited by Steph George. sound mixing by Steph George. Our creative producer is Lauren Audette. And our executive producer is me, Brett Whitmarsh. To learn more about the Heinemann podcast, visit blog.heinemann.com. Thanks for listening.